Hey there, welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business. And this is now our module number 4. And in module 4, what we're looking at is content from chapter 4 of the textbook, which has to do with global business. And so in this very first lecture in module 4, what we're looking at is, what is global business? Well, we're going to try to answer that question and set a context for the entire discussion we're going to have in this series of lectures for chapter 4 of the textbook. What is global business? Well, let's chat about some things that are very close to us in contemporary history. Something that's affected us all. And of course, you probably recognize this electron microscope image of our novel coronavirus of 2019. You can see some of the things that we know very well now after all this time shelter in place and the way it has changed our world, that essentially this novel coronavirus is a new or novel version of the same kind of virus that essentially also causes other types of flus and even the common cold. What we now refer to in the news as COVID-19 is an acronym, a shorthand for the phrase coronavirus disease 2019. That's where we get COVID-19 from. I guess you can use that in your next Trivial Pursuit game if someone asks you what the term actually refers to. But of course, what we realize is, besides just simply being an interesting scientific factoid, it's this coronavirus disease of 2019 and 2020, which essentially shut down our U.S. economy for many weeks, as well as economies throughout the entire world. And as we come out of the coronavirus effects, this will inexorably bring all sorts of vast changes to our understanding of globalization and global business, as well as greatly significant changes in the way that companies do manufacturing supply chains in the near future, which we'll talk about in this module as well. Some other very, very significant things that will happen economically for us as business students. The coronavirus may, and again, it's too early to tell, but it may cause the destruction of many smaller businesses and concentrate power and influence in the hands of very, very large industry players and conglomerates like the Amazon.coms of the world, or the Walmarts of the world, and many smaller local players will suffer, if not go out of business, simply because they did not have the resources to weather the turmoil of the slowdown of the economy, the standstill of the velocity of money through the system, and all of those kinds of things. So remains to be seen, but doubtless this one virus and the effects of the virus will change business not only in the United States, but around the world. Now, we don't have to look just to the coronavirus for examples of this. I can tell you 9 years ago, March 11th, 2011, there was a typhoon caused by a sea earthquake, and the tsunami hit Fukushima, Japan, which caused the crack and meltdown of a nuclear power plant, a nuclear disaster, and therefore the destruction of supply chain. You see some of the results in the larger photo in the right-hand side of the slide. What on earth is we showing you a keyboard on the left-hand side of the slide, though? Well, because in 2011 I had pre-ordered, as a musician, a gigging and performing musician, I had ordered a brand new keyboard that a manufacturer named Korg had just announced, the Korg Kronos. Had pre-ordered it and had gigs planned around it. It was going to be the absolute killer axe for me on my gigs. And then my retailer calls me just weeks, a few weeks, 2 weeks before it was supposed to be shipped to me, and said, hey, the entire manufacturing of this particular unit has been delayed indefinitely. We don't know when it's going to come in stock. And of course, I asked, what the heck? Why is it being held up? And they said, well, it's manufactured in Japan. All of the supply chain has come to a grinding halt because of the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. And, because, in essence, as an American consumer, life revolves around me. I asked, well, when am I going to get it? I feel really, really badly for the people in Japan. And when am I going to get my keyboard? And they said, we really don't know when supply chain will get back to normal and manufacturing will get back to normal in Japan. You're just going to have to wait. Oh, and by the way, they told me, just try to buy a brand new automobile with red or black paint in the next couple of months. I said, what does that mean? They said, well, nowadays with global supply chain, most of red and black paint for automobiles actually comes from Japan. And that too has been brought to a manufacturing standstill because of the effects of the nuclear meltdown and everything else that has brought a complete standstill to the supply chain. Why do I tell you this? Simply this. We live in a global economy. You know it, I know it, we feel the effects every single day. Events that happen halfway around the world can have profound effects on us as consumers around the world, even here in the United States. Things are interconnected in ways that our parents and our grandparents would never have imagined when we talk about the way that business works in a global fashion. This is just one aspect of what we will be talking about in this module, that we now live from a business perspective in an interconnected world. So what's global business? Let's try to answer this question in a detailed fashion. First of all, what's global business? It's business. Okay, remember, the noun is business, the adjective is global, which means it's business that is already complex simply because it's business, but global business has additional complexities that are added once you start buying or selling across the borders of your own country. Well, what types of complexities? Well, now you're not just simply dealing with even your own currency, so you have foreign currency exchange complexities. You have, many times, if you are selling products overseas, you have different consumers than you're used to dealing with in your own country. If you are manufacturing things overseas, you have different suppliers than you have in your domestic landscape. You are dealing with the laws, regulations, and policies of different governments than what you are used to dealing with in your own country. You have very large distances that you may not have been accustomed to in order to transport either imports or exports, and those have their own set of complexities in terms of transportation, tariffs, all those kinds of costs. And many times you are now dealing with people, whether they're consumers, customers, suppliers, vendors, government officials, etc., people with different customs and beliefs about what is normal and therefore what is to be expected. These are just some of the things that make it more complex to do business in a global world. But because it's business, at its root, we're still talking about business. Despite all of these complexities, global business is still about the essence of communication and trust. And this is one thing I think that you should take away from this class, and not simply from this lecture or this module. That really, when we're talking about business, and of course this class is an introduction to business, at its fundamental core, all of business is about communication and trust. If you can learn and mature as a human being in excelling in communication with others and building trust quickly with others as well, well, you will have a fine career in business, because that's the essence of it. And when you look back at the slide, all of the complexities I've listed there, and that, of course, this list is not comprehensive. These are just examples of some of the big ones, right? All of the complexities that you add into the recipe now that you start doing business in a global fashion, at essence, all you're really talking about are details and specificities that you need to pay attention to because they can affect communication and trust. Communication and trust. Those two things are still, at their root, the fundamental essence of what it means to do business. Now, let's ask ourselves a question. Why would anyone engage in global business, especially given the complexities I've just listed on the previous slide? Why would anyone then desire to start international activity and selling or buying things overseas? Well, you can look at it from 3 different perspectives, and these are very important. Okay? So first of all, what do consumers get from embracing international business, global business? Consumers get more variety, they get better quality, and they get lower prices. Sometimes all in the same thing, sometimes not. But the point is, because of the fact that we have more options and more variety, we have more choices, and we like choices. All consumers like more choices. Why do companies and firms go global? Well, you can see it there. Firms get increased revenue. Sometimes they get to reduce their cost, and they get to diversify risk. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a future lecture in this module as well. What does it mean to diversify or to spread your risk around rather than have it all concentrated and focused in one place? That's what companies get out of it. They get a chance to increase their revenue, perhaps gain revenue from markets that they hadn't gotten revenue before, an opportunity to expand their market share, an opportunity to manufacture their products perhaps at greatly reduced cost. All of these kinds of things, right? And number 3, why do nations therefore encourage consumers, their citizens, and encourage their organizations, firms, corporations, companies? Why do they encourage them to embrace global business? Because through global business, nations lift their economies out of poverty. They increase their global status and their importance in the world, and they become a global presence. Now, if you think about this last one, why do nations encourage citizens and companies to engage in international business? If you think about this from a historical perspective, historically, there's only really been 2 ways for a company to quickly lift their citizens out of poverty. One is at the point of a gun by invading and taking over a neighboring country. But of course, generally nowadays, the international community frowns on that kind of activity, obviously, right? That kind of hostility. And therefore, really, the only way, this is the second way, which is to lift your people out of poverty by building up your local domestic economy by engaging in international trade. Whether that's because as a country you are rich in natural resources, or because you are rich in manufacturing capacity or rich in other kinds of capital, any kind of asset, it is on the world stage, the international market, that you can quickly lift your people out of poverty, allow them to live a better standard of living, a better life, and therefore to lift your entire country onto the world stage. Those are really the 3 key reasons why global business has become something that has only increased in importance, despite the last difficulties and challenges of this coronavirus issue that we've all experienced in 2019 and 2020, despite all the other kinds of things that we talk about and will talk about in this module, in this class, all the complexities and challenges of global business. Still, consumers get a great deal out of it. Companies and firms get a great deal out of it. Entire nations and all their citizens get a great deal from international trade. And that's why global business is here to stay. Will it change? Doubtless. It will continue to change, evolve, and morph as we see the world's economic players respond to all of the challenges around us that swirl around us every day. But it will always be an integral part of what it means to be in business in a contemporary landscape. So buckle your seatbelts. This should be an interesting module. I hope that helps as an introduction to module number 4. We'll see you in the next lecture.